Okay, so get this. You're holding a pen about to sign your name. It feels simple, right?
Right.
But hidden beneath that everyday action is this whole world of intricate signals zipping from your brain to your muscles with incredible precision,
Yeah,
ready to explore that world.
let's do it.
Today, we're diving deep into human movement, unraveling how those signals make everything from signing your name to a ballet dancer's grand jeté possible.
And what's really mind-blowing is that we're talking about two completely different types of muscle contractions here.
Okay.
Reflex and voluntary.
Okay.
Think about like yanking your hand away from a scorching hot stove.
Oh, yeah.
That's a reflex, pure instinct. No brain power needed.
Right.
But signing your name?
Yeah.
That's all about intention and a specific set of instructions from your brain.
So reflexes are like our body's emergency response team,
Exactly.
keeping us safe without even asking.
Yeah.
But what about those intentional movements? How does the brain actually tell our muscles what to do?
That's where the magic of neurons comes in. We've got these specialized messengers called upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons.
Okay.
Think of them as a tag team passing along the game plan for movement.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. Who's calling the shots and who's carrying them out?
So the upper motor neurons, or UMNs, are the strategists. They live up in the brain's motor cortex, creating the blueprints for every voluntary movement.
Okay.
These blueprints then travel down the spinal cord where the lower motor neurons, or LMNs, take over.
Okay.
They're the ones directly connected to the muscles making those fibers fire and execute the movement.
So it's like a relay race. UMNs map the course, LMNs bring it home.
Exactly.
But where do these signals actually travel? What are the pathways involved?
One of the most critical is the pyramidal tract, and I think of this one like a high-speed fiber optic cable
Okay.
connecting your brain to your muscles.
Wow.
It's the key to those fine motor skills that make us uniquely human.
So like threading a needle, playing the piano, performing surgery,
Yeah.
those incredibly precise actions all rely on the pyramidal tract.
Exactly. And get this. The fibers of the pyramidal tract don't fully mature until about a year after birth. That's why babies take time to develop that fine motor control. It's not just about learning the movements. It's about the brain literally wiring itself for precision.
That's wild. It's like nature's way of ensuring we have the hardware before we download the software for those complex actions. But what happens if that crucial connection gets disrupted? What if the pyramidal tract is damaged?
That's when we see the devastating effects of conditions like paralysis, the loss of that voluntary control over movement.
Right.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember the Babinski reflex we talked about?
Yeah.
That toe fanning in infants?
Yeah.
Well, if that reflex reappears in adults,
Uh-huh.
it's often a sign of damage to the pyramidal tract.
So it's like that reflex is a hidden window into the brain's wiring, a clue that something might be amiss with the connection between brain and muscles.
Exactly. And it highlights just how intricate and delicate this system is.
Okay, so the pyramidal tract is all about fine-tuning the delicate details.
Right.
But what about those movements that involve our whole body?
Yeah.
Think walking, swimming, swinging a golf club.
Mm-hmm.
Where do those signals originate?
That's where the extrapyramidal tracts come in. Think of this as a complex network of back roads and side streets, compared to the pyramidal tract's superhighway.
Okay.
These pathways have multiple origins in the brain, with stops and connections along the way, making them the masters of coordinating larger multi-muscle movements.
So the pyramidal tract is like a skilled artisan crafting a tiny masterpiece, while the extrapyramidal tracts are choreographing a grand ballet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like damage to the pyramidal tract can disrupt fine motor skills,
Right.
damage to these extrapyramidal pathways can have a huge impact on things like posture balance, even starting and stopping movement smoothly.
Wow.
Imagine trying to walk with jerky, uncoordinated steps or struggling to maintain your balance.
Yeah.
That's the kind of disruption we're talking about.
Okay, this is already blowing my mind. So we've got these two main pathways, the expressway and the scenic route,
Yeah.
both carrying vital instructions from the brain to our muscles.
Right.
But let's zoom in on those messengers themselves, the UMNs and LMNs.
Okay.
What happens if those neurons get damaged?
That's where the distinction between upper and lower motor neuron lesions becomes so important.
Okay.
It's like deciphering a coded message. The location of the damage tells us a lot about what's going wrong.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the difference between an upper motor neuron lesion, or UMNL, and a lower motor neuron lesion, or LMNL?
Think of it this way. And UMNL is like culling the power cable to an entire neighborhood.
Okay.
Everything downstream is affected.
Right.
The brain's signals can't get through, so you see things like spasticity, where muscles become stiff and resist movement.
Oh, wow.
Imagine trying to bend your elbow and it's locked in place.
Yikes. That sounds really frustrating. So with UMNLs, it's about losing that inhibitory control.
Right.
The brain's ability to say, easy does it, to the muscles.
Exactly.
What about LMNLs? What's happening there?
With LMNLs, it's more like cutting the individual wires to specific houses.
Okay.
The signal from the brain is still there, but it can't reach the muscles because that direct connection is broken.
Right.
This leads to weakness, muscle wasting, and decreased reflexes. The opposite of that spasticity we see with UMNLs.
So UMNL is like a traffic jam in the brain,
Yeah.
while LMNL is like a road closure at the very end of the journey.
A perfect way to put it. And understanding these distinctions helps doctors diagnose and treat neurological conditions much more effectively.
This is all incredibly helpful for understanding how those signals get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But let's get specific. Can we dive into some real-world examples of what happens when these pathways are disrupted? I'm thinking about specific lesions and the impact they can have on someone's life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's start with the internal capsule, a critical junction in the brain where both motor and sensory pathways converge.
Okay.
Think of it like a busy intersection where all the neural traffic has to pass through. And because of that, it's a prime target for things like strokes.
Okay, so if the internal capsule is damaged, it's like a major accident at that neural intersection, causing all sorts of problems downstream.
Precisely. Let's say someone has a stroke that affects one side of the internal capsule,
Okay.
a unilateral lesion as we call it.
Yeah.
Initially, they might experience flaccid paralysis where the muscles go completely limp.
Okay.
But over time, that often shifts to spastic hemiplegia.
So they go from complete weakness to stiffness and tightness on one side of their body.
Exactly. And remember, because of how the brain's wiring works,
Yeah.
that hemiplegia affects the opposite side of the body from where the stroke occurred.
That's right. Those motor pathways cross over in the brain. It's incredible to think that one tiny lesion can have such a cascading effect on movement. Are there any other examples of these kinds of lesions that disrupt the motor system?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Brown-Séquard syndrome.
Okay.
This one results from damage to just one half of the spinal cord,
Okay.
a hemisection, and it creates a truly fascinating pattern of symptoms.
Okay, I'm picturing a line drawn right down the middle of the spinal cord.
Oh, wow.
What kind of impact does that have?
Well, on the same side of the lesion, we typically see a loss of fine touch. The ability to sense vibration and proprioception. That's the sense of where your body is in space.
So it's like losing that detailed feedback from your body, making movements incredibly challenging.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really wild. On the opposite side of the body, we see a loss of pain and temperature sensation.
Wait, so the damage is on one side.
Yeah,
But the sensory losses are split across both sides of the body.
exactly. It highlights how those sensory pathways cross over at different levels of the spinal cord, creating this unique and almost paradoxical presentation.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
It is pretty wild.
Who knew that something as seemingly simple as moving our bodies could involve such an intricate web of signals and pathways?
It's truly remarkable.
Yeah.
The complexity of the human nervous system never ceases to amaze me.
Well, I'm already hooked. Listeners, get ready for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll unpack even more mysteries of human movement, exploring the fascinating world of sensory feedback and how it shapes everything we do.
So we've been talking about these incredible signals traveling from the brain to our muscles.
Right.
But what about the information going the other way?
Yeah.
How do our muscles talk back to the brain, giving it updates on what's happening out in the real world?
That's a great point. It's like a two-way street, right?
Exactly.
Our brains send out commands, but they also need constant feedback
Right.
to make sure those commands are being executed properly.
Yeah, imagine trying to walk on a balance beam with your eyes closed.
Oh, God.
You wouldn't last very long without that constant stream of sensory information telling your brain where your body is in space
Right.
and how to adjust your movements to stay upright.
Okay. I'm already feeling a bit wobbly just thinking about that.
Right.
So sensory feedback is like our internal GPS for movement,
Exactly.
guiding us and keeping us on track. But what are the actual pathways involved? How does that information get from our muscles and senses back to the brain?
Well, there are a couple of key routes we need to talk about.
Mm.
One is the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway.
Okay.
It's a bit of a mouthful, I know.
Yeah.
But think of it as the express lane for information about fine touch vibration and proprioception.
Proprioception, that's our body's internal map, right?
Exactly.
It tells us where our limbs are even when we can't see them.
Yeah, it's what allows us to touch our nose with our eyes closed or
Yeah.
walk up a flight of stairs without having to look at each step.
Right.
Without proprioception, we'd be constantly bumping into things and tripping over ourselves.
Okay, so the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway is all about precision. Those fine details of touch and body awareness.
Right.
What about the other pathway you mentioned?
That's the anterolateral system, or spinothalamic tract, and it's responsible for carrying information about pain temperature and what we call crude touch.
Crude touch, what exactly does that mean?
It's basically the opposite of that fine-tuned detailed touch we were just talking about.
Okay.
Think about feeling a fly land on your arm.
Okay.
You know, something is there, but you can't pinpoint exactly where or what it is.
Right.
That's crude touch. It's more about general awareness than precise location.
So it's like the difference between reading Braille and just knowing that someone is holding your hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while it might not seem as glamorous as fine touch,
Right.
crude touch is absolutely essential for survival. It's what alerts us to potential dangers, like extreme temperatures or sharp objects,
Right.
triggering those reflexes that keep us safe.
This is all starting to connect now.
Yeah.
We've got these two parallel systems. One for detailed information about touch and body position, and another for those broader sensations like pain and temperature.
Right.
And both are constantly feeding information back to the brain, allowing it to fine-tune our movements and keep us out of harm's way.
Exactly. It's a constant dance between our brains and our bodies.
Yeah.
A continuous loop of feedback and adjustment that makes smooth, coordinated movement possible.
Okay, I'm starting to see how vital sensory feedback is,
Yeah.
but I think a real-world example might help solidify this concept.
Sure.
Can you paint a picture of how sensory feedback influences a specific action, say, walking?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine you're walking down a sidewalk.
Okay.
Every time your foot hits the ground,
Yeah.
sensory receptors in your feet and legs send a burst of information to your brain about the texture of the surface, the angle of your foot, the pressure you're applying.
So even though walking feels automatic, there's a ton of information processing happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
your brain uses that information to make micro adjustments to your posture, your stride length,
Yeah.
the swing of your arms,
Wow.
all in real time without you even thinking about it.
That's incredible. And what happens if that feedback loop is disrupted, say if someone loses sensation in their feet?
Their walking would become clumsy and uncoordinated.
Hmm.
They might stumble, have difficulty maintaining their balance, and need to look down constantly to make sure their feet are landing properly.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of how much we rely on sensory feedback, even for the most basic movements.
It's like our bodies are constantly recalibrating, adjusting to the environment, and keeping us upright without us even realizing it. Okay, so we've talked about walking,
Right.
but I imagine sensory feedback is even more crucial for more complex movements, right?
Absolutely. Think about playing a sport like basketball.
Okay.
You need constant feedback to judge the distance to the basket, the force needed to shoot the ball, the timing of your jump.
Right.
Or imagine a musician playing a violin.
Yeah.
They rely on subtle vibrations and pressure feedback from their fingers to produce the right notes and create beautiful music.
So it's not just about moving, it's about feeling the movement,
Yes.
sensing the nuances, and constantly adapting.
Precisely. And the more complex the movement, the more critical that feedback loop becomes.
Right.
It's the difference between fumbling and finesse, between amateur and expert.
This is truly fascinating stuff.
It is.
We've gone from those initial signals in the brain to the muscles and now back to the brain again,
Right.
creating this incredible feedback loop that makes coordinated movement possible. But let's not forget the mastermind behind all of this, the brain itself. Can we talk about the specific regions involved in motor control and how they all work together?
Absolutely. Let's start with the motor cortex. It's located at the back of the frontal lobe, and it's essentially the command center for voluntary movement.
Okay.
Think of it as the CEO of movement, issuing those initial orders to get things moving.
So when I decide to reach for my coffee cup,
Yeah,
the signal originates in my motor cortex.
exactly. And different parts of the motor cortex are dedicated to controlling different parts of the body.
Oh, wow.
It's like a map laid out on the surface of the brain, with specific regions for the hands, the feet, the face, and so on.
So it's like a miniature homunculus,
Yeah,
a tiny human mapped out on the motor cortex.
exactly. And the size of each region reflects the complexity of movements that body part can perform.
Okay.
For example, the hands and face have a much larger representation on the motor cortex than the trunk or legs,
Right.
because they're capable of much finer, more intricate movements.
That makes sense. We use our hands for everything from writing to playing the piano to expressing emotions through gestures.
Right.
So the motor cortex initiates the movement, but it doesn't work in isolation, right?
It doesn't.
What other brain regions are involved in this complex choreography?
One of the most crucial is the cerebellum, often called the little brain.
Okay.
It sits at the back of the brain and acts like a master conductor, ensuring all the different instruments in the orchestra are playing in sync.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does the cerebellum contribute to movement?
Think of it as the brain's quality control department.
Okay.
It receives information from the motor cortex about the intended movement,
Right.
as well as feedback from the muscles and the environment about the actual movement.
So it's constantly comparing the plan to the reality.
Exactly.
Making sure everything is running smoothly.
Yeah, and if there's a discrepancy, say you reach for your coffee cup and overshoot,
Oh.
the cerebellum sends out signals to adjust the movement, making
Yeah.
it smoother and more accurate.
So it's the cerebellum that prevents us from spilling our coffee all over ourselves. I'm starting to appreciate this little brain a lot more.
Right. It's also crucial for learning new motor skills and refining existing ones.
Okay.
Remember when you first learned to ride a bike?
Oh, yeah.
All those wobbles and falls?
Yeah.
That was your cerebellum, working overtime, learning to coordinate your movements and keep you upright.
So with practice, the cerebellum gets better at fine-tuning those movements,
Exactly.
making them smoother and more automatic.
It's like learning a dance routine.
Right.
At first, it's all conscious effort, but with enough practice, the movements become ingrained, almost effortless.
Yeah.
And that's thanks in large part to the cerebellum.
This is all so incredibly complex, yet so beautifully orchestrated. Are there any other key players we should mention in this brain symphony of movement?
Yes, there's one more group of structures we need to talk about.
Okay.
The basal ganglia.
Okay.
These are deep within the brain
Okay.
and play a crucial role in selecting and initiating movements,
Uh-huh.
as well as suppressing unwanted movements.
So they're like the brain's traffic cops,
Exactly.
directing the flow of movement and making sure things don't get too chaotic.
They also play a role in learning and forming habits, particularly those involving motor sequences. Think about driving a car.
Okay.
At first, it requires conscious effort to coordinate the steering the pedals, the gears, but over time, those actions become almost automatic,
Right.
thanks in part to the basal ganglia.
So they're responsible for turning those conscious, effortful movements into smooth, effortless habits. That's pretty amazing.
It is. And it highlights just how intricate and interconnected the brain's control over movement really is.
Yeah.
We've got the motor cortex issuing commands, the cerebellum fine-tuning those commands,
Right.
and the basal ganglia selecting and refining those movements, turning them into smooth habitual actions.
It's like a symphony orchestra with each section playing its part to create this beautiful, coordinated performance of movement.
I like that analogy.
But even with all these sophisticated systems in place, there's still room for those primal instinctual movements we talked about earlier, reflexes. Where do those fit into this complex picture?
That's a great question. And it leads us to another fascinating aspect of motor control.
Okay.
Reflexes are those rapid involuntary responses
Right.
that protect us from harm or help us maintain our balance.
Right.
They bypass the brain's higher-level processing centers,
Okay.
creating a shortcut between sensation and action.
So it's like our body's emergency response system kicking in before we even have time to think.
Exactly. And these reflexes work through a simple neural pathway called a reflex arc.
Okay.
It all starts with a stimulus like touching a hot stove or having your knee tapped with a reflex hammer.
Yeah.
That stimulus activates sensory receptors,
Right.
which send a signal along a sensory neuron to the spinal cord.
Okay, so the message is relayed from the point of contact to the spinal cord, the central hub of the nervous system.
Right.
What happens next?
In the spinal cord, that sensory neuron connects with an inner neuron,
Okay.
which acts as a kind of middleman, relaying the signal to a motor neuron.
And that motor neuron is the one that carries the final command back to the muscles,
Exactly.
triggering that lightning-fast response.
Precisely. It's like a chain reaction, a simple but incredibly efficient circuit designed for speed and survival.
Okay, that's the classic knee-jerk reflex.
Right.
But I imagine there are other types of reflexes, right?
Absolutely. There's the pupillary light reflex, where your pupils constrict in response to bright light, protecting your eyes from damage.
Mm.
There's the withdrawal reflex, which makes you pull your hand away from a painful stimulus.
Right.
And there are postural reflexes that help us maintain our balance and stay upright.
So reflexes are like those built-in safety features that keep us functioning and prevent injuries.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface even when we're not consciously aware of it.
It really is. Our bodies are constantly monitoring our environment, making micro adjustments and protecting us from harm, all without us having to lift a finger
Right.
or even a thought.
This has been an incredible journey so far, from those initial signals in the brain to the muscles and back again.
Yeah, it has.
We've explored the pathways, the brain regions involved, and even those primal reflexes that keep us safe.
Yeah.
But I'm left wondering, where does our conscious will fit into all of this?
That's a great question.
How much control do we really have over our movements? That's something we'll explore in part 3 of our deep dive.
It's fascinating to think about how much our understanding of human movement has evolved over time.
It really is.
You know, we've gone from ancient theories about mystical animal spirits controlling our bodies to mapping out these intricate neural highways that govern our every move.
It's mind-boggling, really. And even with all this knowledge, we still have so much we don't know.
I know, right?
Mm.
It's like we've only just begun to explore this vast, uncharted territory within our own bodies.
And that's what makes this field so exciting.
Totally.
Every new discovery opens up like a dozen new questions. It's a constant process of peeling back layers and revealing more and more complexity.
It really is.
And speaking of peeling back layers, I'm curious about the real-world implications of all this knowledge. How does our understanding of the motor system translate into, like, diagnosing and treating neurological conditions?
That's where the true power of this knowledge lies.
Mm.
By understanding how the system is supposed to work, we can better pinpoint where things go wrong and develop targeted therapies to address those issues.
So it's like having a detailed blueprint of a machine.
Yeah.
If something breaks down, you know exactly where to look and what needs fixing.
Exactly. Let's say someone comes in with symptoms of weakness or paralysis. By carefully examining their reflexes, muscle tone, sensory function, a doctor can start to narrow down the possibilities. It's like a detective gathering clues.
So if someone has that stiffness and those overactive reflexes we talked about earlier, it might suggest an upper motor neuron lesion.
Right.
While weakness and decreased reflexes might point to a lower motor neuron problem.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And by combining those clinical findings with imaging studies,
Okay.
like MRI or CT scans, doctors can often pinpoint the exact location of the lesion, whether it's in the brain, the spinal cord, or the peripheral nerves.
That's incredible. It's like having X-ray vision into the nervous system. But how does this knowledge help with actual treatment?
Once we know the nature and location of the problem, we can start tailoring therapies to address those specific deficits.
Okay.
For example, physical therapy and occupational therapy can help people with movement disorders regain strength, flexibility, and coordination.
So it's about retraining the brain and body to work together more effectively.
Right.
Finding new pathways and strategies to compensate for the damage.
Exactly. And in some cases, medications can be used to manage symptoms like muscle spasms or tremors, improving quality of life.
What about more advanced therapies? Are there any cutting-edge treatments on the horizon for motor disorders?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are some very exciting developments in the field of neurorehabilitation, including things like brain-computer interfaces that allow people with paralysis to control devices with their thoughts.
Wow.
And there's promising research into stem cell therapies that might one day help repair damaged neural tissue.
Wow, those sound like game changers.
They really do.
So while we still have much to learn about the intricacies of the motor system, our current understanding is already making a significant impact on the lives of people with neurological conditions.
Absolutely. And as our knowledge continues to grow, we can expect even more innovative treatments and therapies to emerge, offering hope and the possibility of restored function for those affected by these conditions.
It's truly inspiring to think about the possibilities. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the basic mechanisms of movement to the complexities of the brain and the clinical implications of our understanding.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. We've explored the intricate pathways, the elegant choreography of brain regions, and even those primal reflexes that protect us from harm.
It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how much we take our ability to move for granted.
Right.
Every step, every reach, every gesture, it's like a testament to the incredible power and adaptability of the human body.
I completely agree. Movement is a gift, And understanding the symphony of signals and responses that make it possible only deepens our appreciation for this remarkable ability.
Well said. Listeners, we hope this deep dive has left you with a newfound sense of wonder about this intricate world within your own body. And who knows, maybe it's even sparked a desire to learn more about this fascinating field. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.